Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So in this video, we are going to see how useEffect hook works. So useEffect hook is used to run side effects in the React application. What do we mean by side effects? So let's say our application needs to interact with some external system, fetching data from an external API, showing the data in the UI, or let's say we are constantly connecting and disconnecting from a server. So these things can be performed using useEffect hook. Another use case of this thing is do something based on a state change. Let's say we are tracking a particular state. If the value of that state changes, we want to update another state or perform some operation. So those things can also be done using useEffect hook. So we'll see all of these details by implementing a small project. Now let's see the syntax. useEffect hook takes two parameters. The first one is a callback function and the second one is a dependency array. This callback function, which is also called as a setup function, the details of the implementation goes here. It also provides cleanup function inside this setup function. This useEffect hook goes through three phases of rendering process. The first one is during mounting phase. So this setup function will run during mounting phase, and whenever any value changes in the dependency array, this setup function will run. So we'll see all these things in details by implementing a small project. Let's say the component is getting unmounted from the DOM. So this cleanup function will run whatever inside this return function, this thing will run, and change in value from the dependency array. Here is a optional dependency array. Here we can provide different values, and based on the change in the value, it will track and run this setup function. So these are the different phases of useEffect hook. Now let's see what are the different use cases with that. Before that, let's see an example here. So here we have implemented a simple useEffect hook. We have this setup function here, a cleanup function, and a dependency array. So this useEffect hook runs, like I mentioned, during the mounting phase. This mounting of the component console will be logged. During unmounting, this return function will get executed, and this dependency array, whenever the value of this age changes, this setup function will run. Now there are three scenarios. As I mentioned earlier, here you can see this dependency array, it is optional one. So we have three use cases with the dependency array. First one is without providing a dependency array. Here what happens, during the mounting of the component, this setup function will run, and every time any state change happen and the component is getting re-rendered, this setup function will run every time. Now the second scenario is we can provide an empty dependency array. So here the setup code will run during the mounting phase and it will never run again. In the third scenario, we have provided values in the dependency array. So here this setup function will run first time during the mounting of the component, and every time any value, let's say value 1 changes, so this setup code will run, or the value 2 changes, the setup code will run. So these are the different use cases of the dependency array we have here. So by implementing two small projects, we'll understand the detailed functionality of those things. So the first one is fetching data with the useEffect, and second one is a mocking the chat room connection here. So let's jump into the code editor and we'll see all those things in action. Now I have created a simple React application which contains three buttons: album, to-dos, and users. We have created a use state, resource type, and provided every button with a on click and setting the resource type button. So here let's call the useEffect hook. As I mentioned, it takes a callback function and a dependency array. So the first thing that we'll see will cover these three scenarios. The first one is without a dependency array. So let's remove this dependency array and we'll provide some details in the setup function. This mounting, we give it a save, and well, whenever this component, this app component is getting added to the DOM, this thing will run. And I mentioned earlier, if there are any state, if we change the state, this component will get re-rendered. So every time the component gets re-rendered, this useEffect hook will be called. So if I change again, so every time I change, this function, setup function is getting called. Let's say we want the setup code to be runs only once whenever the component is getting mounted. So here in this scenario, this console log will be called only during the mounting of this component and never again. So let's clean up here and refresh this page. So here During the mounting, this setup code has run, and now if I change anything, no matter this component is getting re-rendered, but this function is never getting called. Now the third scenario is we need to provide a value, let's say a resource type, and give it a refresh. Now this you setup function will be called during a mounting phase. That already happened during the mounting phase. Now whenever this value changes, then this console log will run. Now we are changing the value and this thing is getting rendered. Okay, so now as we have mentioned, we'll implement these two. So let's implement this fetching data with effect. So for fetching data from an external source, we are using this JSON placeholder. Here it provides some mock values. Over the API, we can make call to this dummy endpoints and get some data. So here, these are the values, the post values, comments values, album, photos, to-dos, all these things we can get by making a call to this endpoint. So here, I am implementing three things from here, this album and then to-dos and then user. So let's copy this fetch call here and go to our application, and okay, now we'll remove this to-dos and we'll provide the resource type here, and based on that we'll get some data. Now here what happens whenever this component is getting mounted, as we have seen, this fetch call will happen and we'll get the data based on this resource type. So the default resource type is post. So if I refresh this page, so during the mounting phase we got the response from the endpoint. Now let's say we change it to album. So again we got different values for album. If we do the to-dos, we are seeing all the to-dos, and if I change to users, we are getting different data on the users. Now what we'll do, instead of logging in the console, we'll show these things in the UI itself. So for this thing, let's create a data state, set data, and use state, and provide a null default value. So instead of logging it, let's set data to the JSON value, and here we'll map over this data dot map, and for each item we'll render a p tag, and inside of which we need to stringify the values item and give it a save. Okay, now so whenever the component is getting mounted, we are getting the post data. Let's say we change it to, okay, so let's say we change it to album. So now we are getting the album data. If I do change to to-dos, so we are getting the to-dos, and if I change it to user, we are getting this thing. So here we saw the first use case of fetching the data with useEffect. Now let's implement the mocking a chat room connection. So in this scenario, we'll see and understand how this return function is getting executed and why it is required. First, we need to create a JS component. Here we'll implement a mock connection to the server. So export default function create connection. It will take two parameter, server URL and room ID. Okay, so here a real implementation would actually connect to the server. Instead we'll return an object. It will have two method. This connect will simply return a console log connecting to room ID room at this server URL. Another function is disconnect, and here we'll send the message disconnected from the room ID room at the server URL. Now in this function, we are mocking the actual connection. When we call the connect function, it will console log that connecting to the room ID and server. And when we'll call this disconnect function, it will show us this disconnect from this room ID and server. Now we have another component chat room. Here we will establish connection with this server. So here we need to create a state for the server URL, set server URL, then use state will provide it with a default value. Let's say local host 1234. Okay, now we'll call this use effect, and inside of which will provide the callback function and the dependency array. So inside this callback function will provide the setup. So here what we'll do, in the setup function will provide the connection, and the cleanup function will do the disconnect and in the dependency array will provide based on which this connection and disconnection should happen. So here let's say we'll give it this name as connection, and we'll call the function create connection and pass it two value, the server URL and the room ID. So let's pass this server URL and room ID. Room ID which we have not defined yet, so we'll get this room ID through the prop. So let's define it. Now we have created a connection variable. This exposes two methods, one connect and one disconnect. So let's connect to the server connect, and we are doing it. Okay, so whenever this component mounts, this use effect will run, this setup code will run, and it will establish a connection. Now whenever this component is getting unmounted, we can call this return function and do the disconnect. So when the component is unmounted, this connection will be over. So now we have two values here. If you can see here, React Hook use effect has two missing dependency, room ID and server URL. So let's provide this server URL and room ID. Now in this component we'll create a few things. Let's say we can create like server URL, we'll create a put type text, and here actually we'll modify the server URL. Here we'll modify the server URL and see whether this connection is getting called. I mean this connection is reconnecting or not. So in the value field we'll provide this server URL and we'll call a onChange function. This will pass the event object and we'll call the set server URL, and from the event we'll get the target and value. Okay, I think we are good. And here we can provide something like welcome to the room ID room. Okay, now this particular component is establishing the connection and telling us which room we have connected. This chat.js, it is connecting to the actual server URL and exposing the two functions. Now in the app.js will call this chat room component. So before that, let's do one thing. Let's create a state for room ID. Set room ID use state, and let's keep it like general, the default value. Now we'll create another state like set show. So based on it will be a boolean value. Based on the value will show the chat room component. All right, now here let's create a label, choose the chat room. Here we'll take a select component and we'll provide some options to it. The first value will be general, will provide three kind of chat rooms, and two more. This one will be travel and the third one will be music. So let's change the value for these two, travel and music. Okay, now provide it with a onChange value. It takes a callback function and we need to pass the event object also. Takes a callback function and set room ID as event dot target dot value. Now if we save, we can see the drop down, and now give it a save. Here we are seeing three values: general, travel and music. So from this select value we are changing the room IDs. Now we'll create one button element through which we'll connect to the chat room. So this button element based on the show value. If the show value is true, that means we are already connected to the chat room. So in this case, we'll close the chat. And if it's false, that means we are yet to connect to the chat room. So we'll do open chat. Now we'll provide it a on click function, a callback function, and we'll set the show to whatever the reverse value of whatever the value earlier. All right, okay, now why we are seeing an error? So parsing error. Okay, for the ternary operator I need to provide colon. Okay, now based on this value, this is getting changed. So based on this show value, we'll render the chat room component. Okay, and we need to provide the room ID. Okay, now we need to select any chat room. Let's say we are selecting the travel, and whenever we are opening the chat, this is the server URL and welcome to the travel chat room. If I change, and here we can see we are connected to the travel room. So during mounting of this component, this chat component, this setup function, this connection function, this thing run, and we get the values. Now let's say if I close the chat room, then this component is unmounted and the connection was dropped, and this return function got executed. Now let's see another scenario. What happens if we change the server URL? Now we are connected to the music chat room, and if I modify the value to, let's say, 5 6, so here we can see we are constantly, based on this value, this use effect is tracking the server URL value, and based on if it is changed, it is getting called this return function and again executing this setup function. So let's clear this, and let's say if I change the room again, so again this is disconnected. But if I change it to travel, now it is disconnected from the music chat room, and now it is connected to the travel chat room with this server URL. With this, we have covered all the scenario that use effect hook provides, all the details of this setup function, how the cleanup function is running, and what is the necessary of this cleanup function is required, how there are different three different cases: without a dependency array, with a dependency array, and with dependency array, and different values. So here we have covered all the scenario. Hope you have liked this video. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for videos like this.